Uhuru, Comrades, and welcome to today's Omali Taught Me Sunday Study featuring Chairman Omali Yeshitela. My name is Tichara Masimba, and I am the Economic Development Director for St. Louis under the leadership of Deputy Chair Onazene Yeshitela, and I'll be your MC this morning. Today's study is a continuation of a special series where Chairman takes us through each chapter of the political report to the Seventh Party Congress. This week, the Chairman will be reading Chapter 8 titled The State of the Party, Part 2. This chapter further dives into where our party is currently in this era of revolutionary struggle and where we have to go, giving in great detail the task of each department in the party and what our focus has to be going forward. It details each organization under the leadership of the party, from the International People's Democratic Uhuru Movement, the All-African People's Development and Empowerment Project, the African National Women's Organization, the African People's Solidarity Commitment and Uhuru Solidarity Movement, and the party's newest mass front, Communities United for Reparations and Economic Development. Chairman will read all of Chapter 8, and then we'll open it up for questions and answers, where you will have an opportunity to comment and ask questions pertaining to this chapter specifically. We ask that you write your questions as you think of them so that we are able to start reading them following the reading. It is now my honor to introduce the visionary leader, the spearhead of the Vanguard Party, the leader of the African nation, Chairman Omali Yeshitela. Uhuru.
Uhuru. The explosive growth of the African People's Socialist Party since our last Congress is evidenced by the development of our constituent mass organizations, the primary means by which the party maintains firm links with the colonized African working class as the advanced detachment of the African Revolution. One of the most important organizations of the party is the International People's Democratic Uhuru Movement, or InPDUM. Although the date given for the formal founding of InPDUM is April 1991, its predecessor was organized in Oakland, California in the mid-1980s as the People's Democratic Uhuru Movement, or PDUM. The party built PDUM as our mass organizational response to the brutal counterinsurgency that continued to impact the lives of African workers throughout the U.S. By the time of PDUM's founding, our party had built a powerful movement in Oakland. We were organizing on the streets every day, fighting for the rights of the African working class, which had been demoralized by the U.S. military defeat of the Black Revolution of the 60s. During the party's historic Oakland years, we had organized a massive land reform campaign, following on the heels of a powerful struggle against the forced mass homelessness of African people. We got 30,000 signatures putting Measure O, the Community Control of Housing Initiative, on the Oakland ballot, winning more than 20,000 votes in 1984. In the face of the growing mass incarceration of African people, we had built the African National Prison Organization and helped to resurrect remnants of the U.S. front of the African Liberation Movement with the brilliant international campaign to free Desi Woods and smash colonial violence. We had succeeded in our goal of making reparations a household word when we created the African National Reparations Organization, or ANRO, following the first International Tribunal on Reparations to African People in Brooklyn, New York in 1982. Nevertheless, conditions did not support the efforts to take a revolutionary program directly to the masses. The U.S. counterinsurgency had so enfeebled the African liberation movement that the party was nearly alone in our efforts to advance the revolution. Moreover, the masses of our people suffered serious demoralization from the assassinations, jailings, and the imposition of a drug economy within our community as neo-colonial politicians were elevated to office. We intended to use PDUM as an organizational front that would be engaged in ongoing struggle to win Africans to political action around the critical issues confronting us on a daily basis. These issues included the symptoms of colonialism, such as police brutality, homelessness, mistreatment of our children in the schools, among others. With this strategy, the party was soon able to bring more Africans in Oakland into a dynamic anti-colonial political movement. We resurrected former Black Panther leader Huey P. Newton back into temporary political life. As we stated in the political report to our 2016 plenary, it was with InPDUM that we created a free healthcare movement that won general support among the colonized African community and the people at large. We did this and more while creating an intensely activist, street-based mass anti-colonial, anti-capitalist movement that smashed the class peace in Oakland and allowed the masses to regain confidence in their own independent revolutionary organization. As it was initially conceived, InPDUM also recruited North Americans or white people through the involvement of our solidarity movement that took our campaign and issues into the white colonizer nation community. This was a strategy to prevent isolation of our people and party by winning support for our campaigns and raising much needed material solidarity. In 1991, it was clear to us that InPDUM's work had to be taken beyond the Oakland Bay area and everywhere throughout the U.S. where African workers were facing the same conditions. This was the basis of our decision to build the National People's Democratic Uhuru movement with a founding convention in Chicago on April 6, 1991. My political report to the founding convention of InPDUM was clear on our need to complete the Black Revolution of the 60s. We were explicit that InPDUM was founded and led by the African People's Socialist Party, the advanced detachment of the African working class, the vanguard of the African Revolution. As we declared in the political report to the representatives from 25 cities and 24 states, and I quote, some of you who are present today may very well see your presence as accidental. Perhaps you accidentally came upon a copy of the Burning Spear newspaper or a brochure announcing the founding of the National People's Democratic Uhuru movement today. Perhaps you saw Akur Njeri, Fred Hampton's widow and herself a survivor of the December 4th, 1969 pre-dawn massacre on television and heard her announce today's convention. Perhaps you heard a solidarity worker on the radio or bumped into an Uhuru organizer on your campus or in your community. Whatever the case, we want to say right now that your presence here is no accident. It is a consequence of hard work that is consistent with a major strategic aim to complete the Black Revolution of the 60s, unquote. Quote. Whatever the case, for 19 years we have worked to build and consolidate the African People's Socialist Party as the advanced detachment of the most slandered, feared, and despised African working class that continues even today to experience the brunt of the counterinsurgency. Nor are these empty, boastful statements. The reality of my words is to be seen in the essentially working class composition of the African participants in this meeting, and the fact that everyone who is here is here essentially through the independent efforts of these African workers and their revolutionary party. All the comrades who are here from California and Florida, from Indiana, Kansas, Maryland, Oklahoma, and other places are here through their own efforts to facilitate our own agenda without the contamination of white liberal trade unionism, any front of the Democratic Party or white nationalist leftists or connections with the liberal African petty bourgeoisie. We are here through our own efforts, and that is a turning point in our movement and an indication that the counterinsurgency is being overcome, and the masses of African people are re-entering political life on our own terms, unquote. The founding convention recognizes that to defeat U.S. parasitic white capitalism, we must struggle for real democracy. Our convention made it clear that we mean something different by democracy than the liberals or of the oppressor and oppressed nations. And quoting again from the founding document, even as we struggle to defend the national democratic rights won by our people in the past, rights which are constantly being abrogated by the U.S. government in the name of fighting a war against drugs, The National People's Democratic Uhuru movement will struggle to extend the question of democracy beyond the definitions of the liberal African petty bourgeoisie, unquote. We explained that for colonized people, the highest expression of democracy is self-determination. This became the guiding line of InPDUM. It was our understanding that because democracy is simply a form of the state, in the struggle for liberation and socialism, we must overturn bourgeois democracy itself. In fact, for colonized people, the struggle for democracy can only be won by eliminating the authority of the colonial state over our lives. InPDUM soon grew internationally into the International People's Democratic Uhuru movement, with the establishment of branches in Europe and Africa. Over the years, InPDUM has waged intense struggles against virtually every manifestation of anti-democratic activity by the colonial state in various places around the world. This includes London, Sierra Leone, Toronto, Canada, and cities throughout the US. Before the people of the world had ever heard of Mike Brown and Ferguson, Missouri, InPDUM had been leading a mass fight back for decades against police terror in the streets of Philadelphia, Chicago, and London. It was InPDUM that confronted the neo-colonial government in Sierra Leone in West Africa. It was InPDUM that withstood and defended ourselves against a military assault on our St. Petersburg, Florida headquarters by more than 300 colonial police personnel with light airplanes, helicopters, and the city's entire reserve of tear gas against our organization and leaders. Political conditions and the dearth of party cadre at the time prevented us from immediately achieving the full potential of InPDUM. Nevertheless, the organization tremendously impacted the ability of our colonized peoples to fight back from the terror-induced stupor experienced by Africans everywhere, still recovering from the setbacks to our struggle against foreign and alien domination. That era of InPDUM as a defensive response to the counterinsurgency is surely over. Today's world is characterized by a determined, if not yet consolidated shift in the global balance of power. This is a period of frenzied despair by colonial powers, caused by the growing confidence of colonially oppressed peoples everywhere. What is true of the world in general is also true within the borders of the US, where the government is using all of its compromised political power to push back the incipient organizational expression of mass African anti-colonial re-entry into political life. InPDUM has gone through a number of leaders since its founding. Each was a reflection of the period and the political and ideological development within the party and the African liberation movement at the time. While each leader was a person of conviction, none of them constituted revolutionary cadre in the truest sense of the term. We have lost leaders because of their unwillingness to recognize that InPDUM is an instrument of the African People's Socialist Party's strategy to mobilize and organize the masses of African people into a determined revolutionary anti-colonial process. We have had at least one leader of InPDUM whose primary role at a critical moment was to provide stability and continuity to the organization. Subjectivism and other expressions of individualism and liberalism also played roles in the contradictions of past leaders. Another leader was characterized by cadre-like tendencies, boldness, creativity, and a willingness to initiate, engage with, and participate in mass struggle, but whose activities were directed more towards self-promotion than building InPDUM. Today, things have been turned around, and each day the future looks brighter for InPDUM. The leadership provided by Comrades Sister Kalambayi, Andanet, fresh to political life and new to the party and the Uhuru movement, is a major factor in rectifying some past errors. In August 2014, our party encountered Sister Kalambayi in a demonstration in Ferguson, Missouri, protesting the police murder of Mike Brown. That murder was the straw that broke the camel's back, kicking off a new era of struggle that helps to shape the mission of InPDUM at this time. In this short period of time, Kalambayi has become a member of our party and has come to exemplify the power and will of the conscious African proletariat. Since her September 2015 appointment as InPDUM president, this young mother of two daughters has brought a new energy to the mass organization of the party and to all who have been touched by her presence and leadership in the struggles characterizing the period. Kalambayi has moved swiftly with the daunting task of consolidating InPDUM's leading body and breathing life into the too often neglected organizational structures. Clearly, Kalambayi Andanet is the right leader for InPDUM at the right time. Now, InPDUM must prepare to effectively move to the offensive after its beginning as a defensive response to the military defeat of our movement. This is the party's most important connection to the masses of our people. It is the party's instrument for intervening in the struggles of our people with revolutionary science. InPDUM is a method through which African internationalist cadre can root themselves among the people and provide leadership for the thousands of Africans who, for any number of reasons, are not members of our party. Currently, the general response to the U.S. colonial police murders of Africans is not led by our party or any anti-colonial organization of the African working class for that matter. Every hustler and charlatan quickly descends to the scene of the latest colonial crime and positions himself at the front of mass demonstrations brandishing reformist banners and slogans. African students, many with bourgeois political aspirations of their own or misdirected by assumptions of colonially defined education, sometimes militantly rush to the forefront of the mass movement, blithely regurgitating political conclusions from colonial civics lessons. This range of forces, combined with the conscious opportunists, are determined to smother the ability to advance long-term revolutionary conclusions that answer the question, to what end? This gives greater urgency than ever to the role of InPDUM. Our party encountered all these forces upon our arrival in Ferguson. None of these forces are new to us. The truth is that the Africans suffer colonial oppression that affects the entire African nation. It is logical that non-proletarian forces will move to take the leadership of the response to colonial brutality. All of them have more resources and meet the standards of bourgeois media compared to the African working class. The contradictions InPDUM was formed to overcome is the absence of the organized leadership of the proletariat. InPDUM is an organization of our party. InPDUM, as an organization of our party, has to be present to directly contend with non-proletarian forces for the leadership of our people. The presence of opportunist, petty bourgeois forces in mass struggle should not be used as an excuse for our lack of participation. Such a failure to intervene would be the basis for self-criticism, for relinquishing the field of combat to non-revolutionary social forces. The mass resistance of the past few years is a sign of the growing African national consciousness. The expansion of our party's influence and the enthusiasm for the Black Power blueprint in St. Louis are evidence that we have entered a new period of anti-colonial African resistance within current borders of the U.S. InPDUM must build for the long term to contend with the pending whirlwind of struggle. We reiterate that every member of the party must join InPDUM, even if our primary work prohibits us from the fullest participation. Our membership dues and presence in local meetings give the organization greater capacity on many levels. InPDUM must be the most zealous distributor of the party's press, especially the Burning Spear, for which it must also supply articles that will facilitate its organizing efforts. Our party leaders must also be cognizant of the role of InPDUM as a major producer of a deep pool of potential party recruits, a reserve force for the revolution where Africans learn organization and how to be organized. InPDUM must become the method with which we actually contend with non-proletarian forces for political, ideological, and territorial influence and power. community political education classes, and integration of InPDUM members into other campaigns and institutions of the party will become weapons in the struggle to win this battle against colonialism. As we discussed thoroughly in Chapter 6, the strategic direction following our 7th Congress will require InPDUM to open offices in the various working class communities throughout the African colony. This is how we move toward real organizing of the African working class with a strategy that places us in the midst of the colonized communities with our people, sharing their circumstances and building our own solutions. Chapter 6 lays out a detailed plan for how local InPDUM offices in the heart of the African working class communities will become outlets for party economic development products, from African and movement clothing up to Uhuru food and pies. Under the determined leadership of our cadre, they will be the place where community food gardens and other ventures will be organized by the people and among the people. This is the most important strategic direction for InPDUM moving from our 7th Congress. The strategic direction that truly requires members of our party to assume the responsibility of the advanced detachment. InPDUM has moved to repair its recruitment and membership process to make it consistently reliable with a growth in numbers that reflect its influence and the obvious desire of the thousands of African workers to join our movement. InPDUM must construct an internal apparatus for initiating and overseeing an effective, scientifically based branch building campaign. Membership and branches, while always important, are even more critical today with our plans for dual power advances led by individual members of InPDUM from local offices wherever we are. The fact that InPDUM's international office is currently located at the Uhuru House in St. Louis is recognition of the role of that city in the re-energized consciousness of the colonized Africans throughout the U.S. St. Louis is the front line of the struggle at this moment. Additionally, the rich history of African culture and resistance in St. Louis also plays a major role in the organizing efforts of the advanced detachment in a city where the African working class clearly desires an ability to fight in its own selfish interests. Our designation as the advanced detachment can be seen in the ongoing work being done by President Kalambayi to overcome contradictions and build InPDUM into a massive organization. Its growth will meet the task imposed on us by history at this moment of imperialist crisis, where the bloated underbelly of white power is being daily exposed for revolutionary assault. InPDUM President Kalambayi comes directly from the African working class. As an African mother of 2 children, she brings an important connection to the 50% of the colonized African population that is too often left out of all the political discussions and struggles we are making to capture political power and change the world. To the dismay of some, perhaps many, Comrade Kalambayi's presidency contributes to the obvious inclusion of many African women in the struggle for our liberation and unification of Africa and Africans worldwide. The intense struggle within InPDUM to transform the organization into the best possible mass vehicle for waging the struggle against colonialism contributes to our ability to loudly declare that we are winning, and the ranks of the advanced detachment are growing daily and becoming more competent in the process of doing so. Now we must build InPDUM, this incredibly important arm of the party and our revolution, into an organization of tens of thousands. We must do this quickly and efficiently, using all the protocols and manuals for building and recruiting. InPDUM is in a position to operate in the various working class communities of our dispersed colonized nation that have been abandoned by the African petty bourgeois opportunists. These are communities that are always under the cruel boot of colonial oppression. These are our communities, the communities of the advanced detachment, the vanguard. Another critical weapon in the arsenal of our party is the All African Peoples Development and Empowerment Project, APDEP, formed to collectivize the vast skills of Africans around the world in order to establish community-based development projects that improve the quality of life for African people everywhere while promoting self-reliance and self-determination as key to genuine sustainable development. The work of APDEP made major leaps this year despite the previous uncertainties and ups and downs of this work headquartered in Huntsville, Alabama. A significant turning point of APDEP work was the creation of Zenzele Consignment, APDEP's economic development institution, in August 2016. Zenzele marks an important contribution to our party's fight for anti-colonial economic self-reliance. But it is more than that. Zenzele provides APDEP with a permanent physical presence, a place where Africans in Huntsville can come to participate in the work and the various events that we initiate from this location. Zenzele provides APDEP with an office and a recruitment station, as well as African clothing and accessories that complement our cultural outreach. The consignment store also opens the door for participation in the party's work by volunteers who sympathize with the cause promoted by APDEP. Party and movement meetings are conducted there. Already the store has magnified the party's presence many times over. It enhances the party's work by helping the working class to recognize. It enhances the party's work by helping the working class to recognize us as more than some fly-by-night operation of militants who only talk a good game. We are made real in the minds of many by the presence of Zenzele. An outstanding example of cadre was seen in the work by Comrade Aisha Fields to build APDEP's November 2017 National Convention in Huntsville, attended by Africans from throughout the U.S., including new members and leaders. The convention was especially important for what it promised through its Project Black Ankh, attended by Africans from throughout the U.S., including new members and leaders. The convention was especially important for what it promised through its work to build the Project Black Ankh, our response to the Imperialist Red Cross. Project Black Ankh established a presence and reputation during the Ebola crisis in Sierra Leone in 2014. The APDEP convention also unveiled a program related to the Black Ankh that teaches disaster preparation to our colonized communities. This will make Africans less dependent on the imperialists for aid. APDEP is contributing to the self-determination of African people with this and other programs that empower the people and can be easily implemented virtually every African community in the world. Much of APDEP's work will be showcased at our 7th Congress. It is consistent with our approach to our struggle to end our colonial subjugation and reliance on our colonial oppressors. APDEP work exemplifies the unity of practice and theory that we find so important. It is the work that keeps us out of the category of simple dispensers of information and people with great ideas that, for whatever reason, cannot be implemented. In the real world, this is what makes us the advanced detachment of the African Revolution and the vanguard of the African working class. The African National Women's Organization, ANWO, is another example of genuine cadre work that embodies the theme of our 7th Congress. ANWO's 2018 convention, the first since its founding, clearly opened the door for women to come fully and enthusiastically into revolutionary political life. It proved for everyone that the struggle of African women does not have to be bogged down in the swamps of petty bourgeois feminism. African women want revolution, and they want the removal of any obstacle that stands between them and revolution. The convention revealed that African women want to struggle around all the issues affecting them and not just the issues affecting upper-class women. ANWO recognized that the contradictions between colonized African men and African women are non-antagonistic. ANWO helps everyone to see that while There are contradictions in everything. We can only win our liberation by being able to identify the main contradiction, the one around which all the others revolve, the one which provides the condition for the existence of the others. The main contradiction is colonialism, the foreign and alien domination of our whole people, men, women, and children. While the main contradiction afflicting us all is colonialism, ANWO recognizes that there are contradictions between African men and women, and that the struggle to resolve these non-antagonistic contradictions must be ruthlessly fought in the process of destroying the system of colonial capitalism. ANWO's March 2018 convention offers profound evidence of the general state of our party approaching our 7th Congress. Comrade Yejide Odunmila, president of ANWO and the head of the party's Women's Commission, is truly stepping up to provide leadership for ANWO and the struggle against the hostile, petty bourgeois, feminist ideological invasion of our colonized community. The convention reported on the programs and campaigns of ANWO, including the Uhuru Kijiji Child Care Collective, a dual-power, do-for-self institution that takes the child care and education of our children out of the hands of the state that colonizes, oppresses, and kills them, and empowers the parents and our community to reassume responsibility over the lives of African children. The Black is Back Coalition for Social Justice, Peace, and Reparations is one of the most important areas of mass work our party has been involved in for the last 9 years. The coalition has allowed the party to participate in developing and implementing a revolutionary national democratic program designed to unite the U.S. domestically colonized African population in an anti-colonial trajectory. The coalition has also been important for winning different political tendencies within the basic anti-imperialist sector of our community in a common organization. Previously, they were just individuals or organizations working in isolation from each other without any general united upon program. The Black is Back Coalition is another accomplishment that permits us to recognize our party as the advanced detachment of the African Revolution and the vanguard of the African working class. The more than 40 years of consistent party work prepared our party for the task of organizing the coalition. We organized this much-needed, united anti-colonial formation because we were the only organization with the capacity to do so. Unlike the African petty bourgeoisie that is always blinded by its own narrow self-interests, the party is the only social force capable of uniting the fight for the liberation of our whole people. The existence of the coalition defied the petty bourgeois' cynical assumptions of the inability to win the unity of different class and ideological expressions of self-determination into a single unified organization. It took the skill and determination of the African People's Socialist Party to hold the coalition together for 9 years as a critical force for advancing our struggle against colonial capitalism. This happened despite the obvious differences in class and ideological outlooks in the coalition from its very inception. We were able to do this because the party has always embraced the struggle for national liberation as an instrument for winning the liberation and unification of Africa and African people worldwide under the leadership of the African working class. The participation of the party in the coalition has contributed to a new definition of the anti-war or peace movement. We have challenged the notion of imperialist peace, championed by the anti-war movement, a peace that does not call for victory of the oppressed. This has been an extremely important part of our work in the African People's Socialist Party. It is also a part of the effort that we have had to make to maintain the unity of the most progressive sector of the African nation, the most democratic forces of the African nation in a common trajectory to defeat colonialism, which is the oppression, the national oppression of all African people. As a party of the working class, has always been possible for us to strike out simply on our own, trying to build a revolutionary project or revolutionary trajectory that did not recognize the fact that the whole African nation is oppressed and therefore has an interest in ending colonial domination. And often we've seen like what we might call an ultra-left movement, where the quote-unquote revolutionaries run out and attempt to conquer the world or overturn capitalism, which means that we have a situation of extreme isolation of our most revolutionary forces. And that's the thing that characterizes as ultra-leftists on the one hand. On the other hand, we've seen forces that say what you have to do is just build coalitions and you don't have a revolutionary party. You see a swing from this ultra-left to this rightist position, and not recognizing that a revolutionary party assumes the responsibility, the total responsibility. It has to assume responsibility for the liberation of the nation. And within that context, we fight for the liberation of the African working class. The working class must be emancipated, but it also must lead this struggle, because the African petty bourgeoisie cannot see beyond its own selfish class interests. The African working class, revolutionary African working class, armed with revolutionary science, philosophy, recognizes its interests as a class, the responsibility it has to lead this struggle in order to achieve genuine national liberation. Because if you look at all over the African world, you see what are supposed to be countries, in quotes, that have become independent. All over Africa, you see what's supposed to be independent African states. All over the Caribbean and places in South America, we see independent entities and what have you, but all of them suffering under the horrible oppression of imperialism. That's because the struggles for independence have, generally speaking, been led by the African petty bourgeoisie. Now, what we're talking about is the responsibility of the African working class to lead the struggle for independence, while recognizing that in the struggle for independence, there is also a class struggle that is raging, and that the African working class must lead the struggle, even the struggle for national liberation, even the struggle for independence. And the party increasingly is growing that capacity to do that, and is demonstrating that capacity to do that. We say that, and the dealing within the United States in much of the areas in the imperialist centers, say the United States, but we could be talking about Canada, we could be talking about all of Europe and certain other areas where white people who represent the center of colonial capitalism, they have a different worldview in terms of what peace means, what it looks like, what being against imperialism means. In most instances, what they normally do is talk about peace and imperialism in a way, they define it in ways that have significance to them as white people. They don't say as white people. They call themselves communist, leftists, and things like that. But if you look at what we see, well, we'll say more about that when we talk about this discussion with the coalition, because it's very important. It's one of the most important things we've done in a long time, and it has really won a kind of unity within the African liberation movement itself for national liberation, for self-determination, and on an anti-imperialist trajectory, and that's been extremely important. So we say that the participation of the party in the coalition has contributed to a new definition of the anti-war or peace movement. We have challenged the notion of imperialist peace championed by the anti-war movement, a peace that does not call for victory of the oppressed. So that's all we hear. I mean, for as long as I've been alive, and for most of the history that we are familiar with, we've seen these movements for peace, 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 anti-war, peace. But it's not it can never be peace as long as imperialism exists. and the anti-war or the peace movements have never genuinely been about overturning imperialism. And of course, the root of empire is the oppression and exploitation of African and other colonized peoples around the world. Therefore, they can talk about being for peace without mentioning Africans and the colonized people in other places, unless this war that they are contending with is something that offers a possibility that somehow they will be drawn into it, could be killed by it, or something to that effect. Through our work in the coalition, we have defined and organized against the war of colonial terror imposed on Africans and others in the U.S. and around the world that is usually ignored by the white anti-war movement. This includes the relentless aggression against the indigenous peoples in the concentration camps and barrios of the U.S. The struggle of the peoples of the Philippines and throughout the Americas were seldom, if ever, raised by the peace movement before the intervention by the coalition. Our party played no small part in helping to force these issues onto the anti-imperialist peace agenda. The coalition organized a national conference against the other wars in Washington, D.C. in 2011. Before the advent of the coalition, the anti-war movement saw no interest in opposing imperialist aggression against our people and the peoples of the world when there was no direct or indirect potential for North Americans or white people being harmed by existing or pending war. Over the years, the coalition has continued to grow and win greater recognition within the anti-imperialist and anti-colonial movement in the U.S. The coalition has provided important mass political education through its annual mobilizations and conferences, attracting hundreds of people and opening up political discussions that had been muted by the defeat of our revolution of the 1960s. After the 2008 election of Barack Hussein Obama, the Black is Back coalition began a serious discussion around the electoral process and the role of Obama as president. This allowed the party to participate in defining the role of bourgeois elections before extremely receptive audiences. The coalition also organized schools to challenge the hegemony of the reactionary African petty bourgeoisie over the electoral process, a process that we recognize in our party as a major method used by the white ruling class to implement neo-colonial domination of our people. The participation of our people in these schools was the best possible evidence of the effectiveness of the coalition and the role of our party in this mass work. The Black is Back coalition electoral schools also provided the unambiguous basis for legitimate anti-colonial intervention in the electoral process, an issue that has been controversial within the U.S.-based African liberation movement since universal suffrage for Africans in the U.S. was legalized in 1965. The years of uninterrupted revolutionary work of our party also made it possible to provide a variety of resources to the coalition, human and material. We had the capacity within the African People's Socialist Party to put organizers on the ground to bring many of the coalition projects to fruition. The years of development and leadership of our party made it possible for our institutions to often provide meeting spaces for coalition conferences and events. The independent capacity of our party allowed us to confer an independent capacity to our movement. Let me say that again. The independent capacity of our party allowed us to confer an independent capacity to our movement. Within the coalition, there are Africans who are actively engaged in work to win black community control of the police, reparations, release of and relief for political prisoners, and black community control of education, the national black political agenda for self-determination, and a process for determining the legitimacy of black elected officials and anyone campaigning for the African vote, all found in a single organization. This is not to say that the coalition is a revolutionary organization. It is not. So far, it appears that the party is the only participating organization that even claims revolution as its objective. In fact, There are some within the coalition who still unite with traditional liberal white left anti-war organizations that call for the end of war and U.S. quote-unquote militarization, including slogans like money for jobs, health care, and education, not for war. This, of course, is a total misunderstanding of colonialism and imperialism. In general, the colonial capitalist system is a colonial capitalist system, and it does not make resources available for the colonially oppressed during recognized periods of war or periods of peace. That's always been an interesting slogan that's come from usually from the liberal, sometimes disguised as communist movements that, calls for stuff like not war, money for jobs and not for war and things like that, and money for education and money for this and not for war. But there has never been a time where the colonial powers have provided money for education and money for jobs and the people, whether at war or peace. And so colonialism doesn't do that. Imperialism doesn't do that. What appears to be the examples of something different has been the occasions, one in particular, after the Second Imperialist War, where it was all these jobs programs were put forth to repair infrastructure and stuff like that in order to keep revolution from occurring inside the United States, and that was under the Roosevelt administration. But imperialism doesn't misuse resources when it's killing people around the world, and then somehow once it recognizes it stops doing that. Now it's going to just provide jobs and what have you. Imperialism was born through warfare and murder. That's the basis of all of the resources that it gets. So to say that somehow, no money for war and money for jobs and education and all these other things, it's just something doesn't work. And that's from forces who are incapable of calling for the destruction of imperialism itself. However, the nature of the Black is Back coalition allows for the coexistence of different worldviews. We are a revolutionary organization with a seizure of power on our agenda. This is not true for any other coalition organization. Our participation in the coalition revolves around a broad anti-imperialist national agenda that forges the struggle for national liberation without necessarily addressing the issues of class, tactics and strategy, and the kind of social system being pursued. Unlike some coalition partners, our party does not depend on an epiphany from the Congressional Black Caucus or any other variation of the congressional strategy traditionally embraced by the Communist Party USA as a substitute for fighting for the independent power of a working class. It's really interesting. I've forgotten the year when this happened, but where the Communist Party USA actually ran a candidate for president and its own Central Committee voted for the Democratic Party candidate for president, because their whole strategy has been what they call a congressional strategy, where they bury themselves inside the Democratic Party. This is how they carry out their revolutionary work from within the Democratic Party. Of course, that was the case. I don't know if they carry out any work anymore today, but the record of the Congressional Black Caucus is clear. It is deeply attached to imperialism and does not even have the capacity for any kind of anti-colonial activity or statement. We see the dependence of the Congressional Black Caucus of some liberal wing of the Democratic Party as conceding our leadership of the African working class struggle to the white ruling class. Unlike some activists of the coalition, our party is free to pursue an anti-colonial peace as opposed to an imperialist peace. Because we are an independent party with a real capacity, we are not in the position of having to curry favor with the liberal white left representatives of the colonizer population to win support for a real anti-imperialist agenda. While our party is a revolutionary anti-colonial capitalist party of the African working class, most of the anti-war or peace movement is led by a specific liberal left party type formation, such as the Workers' World Party or its splinter group, the Party for Socialism and Liberation. The coalition is and so a lot of times, though, people don't know that when they join these organizations, that it's really the mass work of a particular white left organization. And, but it is. The coalition is an organization of organizations and institutions. There are also individual members of the coalition who are advised to join one of the various working groups. The very nature of the coalition means that it is comprised of different ideological, political, and even class expressions, a fact that seriously challenges the permanent unity of the organization. However, because ours is a party of the working class, we have always recognized the importance of anti-colonial unity to advance the revolutionary interests of the African nation under the leadership of the African working class. There's no way to speak of the state of the party without acknowledging one of our most significant organizations, the African People's Solidarity Committee, APSC. APSC was organized by the party in 1976 in St. Petersburg, Florida. Its creation was one of the most important occurrences in the history of our revolutionary struggle for the total liberation and unification of Africa and African people worldwide. We must also recognize the role in the development of APSC that was played by its chairwoman, Comrade Penny Hess. Comrade Penny has been the most important factor in the development of the African People's Solidarity Committee and the Solidarity Movement as a whole. After years of struggle with the North American comrades to move beyond white liberalism to a genuine stance of anti-colonial solidarity, it was Comrade Hess who finally broke from the pack, united with the party's line, and realized our efforts to build a movement of principled white solidarity with African liberation. It was Comrade Hess's intervention that resulted for the first time, after an initial 8 years of struggle waged by the party with the Solidarity forces, in a political stance and theoretical unity by APSC that reflected our African internationalist worldview and practice. It was through Comrade Hess that the party was first able to experience our political line, theory, and practice coming back to us from the African People's Solidarity Committee. The initial formation of APSC was met with hostility and suspicion from the colonizer communist movements, organizations, and other liberal white leftists. A recurring criticism by the white left revolved around the idea of whites working under the leadership of African people. Our colonizer nation Communist Party, one colonizer nation Communist Party, went so far as to say that APSC would fail because whites, quote unquote, would not work against their own interests. That is, it's a most revealing statement suggesting that working under African working class leadership was not in the interest of whites. This was an especially instructive criticism as it was uttered by an organization that otherwise extolled the leadership of the African working class. Some African race nationalists were also opposed to the founding of APSC. Some stated opposition despite the fact that many had secret, which is to say, unprincipled relationships with white left liberals that their race nationalist politic could not justify. Some, including those with secret relationships, opposed the founding of APSC because, quote unquote, white people cannot be trusted. Today, APSC and the Solidarity Movement directly under its leadership number hundreds of members who are constantly and actively involved in fighting for black power within the colonizer community. This means even within their families, these North Americans are fighting to win African internationalist, anti-colonial unity with our struggle. This requires more than simply having forums and participating in debates and the like with white left organizations. APSC is a mass formation. APSC is mass formation, Uhuru Solidarity Movement and other sectors of the Solidarity Movement under its leadership fight for material solidarity. Through APSC, our party has been able to extend the struggle for reparations to African people, to the colonizer nation population. The founding of APSC has permitted the party to do what has never been done before. We are actually collecting reparations from thousands of white people who want to rectify their relationship to African people and have been educated to understand the relationship between white affluence and the destitution of the rest of the world. They understand the difference between reparations as an anti-colonial struggle and charity which benefits the colonial donor. APSC and USM are growing exponentially. The work under the leadership of APSC represents the most dynamic, fastest growing anti-imperialist movement within the North American community. Daily, mostly young people from the colonizer nation are being brought into the embrace of our party through the work of APSC. At the time of this writing, the Uhuru Solidarity Movement has members in at least 30 states within current U.S. borders. All signs indicate that the number will continue to grow. As is well known, in 2017, the party ran a member of the African People's Solidarity Committee, Jesse Neville, the national chair of the Uhuru Solidarity Movement, for mayor in St. Petersburg, Florida, along with party leader Akili Anai for District 6 City Council. Although we lost the election, we were able to initiate an unending campaign that saw hundreds of white people marching through the streets chanting unity through reparations and solidarity with the black working class. This is the kind of work the party has been able to do through APSC that will have lasting political implications throughout the world. APSC and Uhuru Solidarity Movement have also played critical roles in the Black Power Blueprint campaign in St. Louis. They have been able to win reparations in the amounts of thousands of dollars from other white people who are consciously uniting with the African working class party to overturn colonialism. You know, we talk about being being practical revolutionaries. And what we mean, part of what we mean when we say that is that we're not just people who talk about struggle or have purely abstract work or relationship to revolutionary struggle. I mean, it's almost everything that we talk about, we do it. We do it. If reparations is a question, it has been an outstanding question, say we're going to do reparations work. We didn't just say that. We said we're going to make reparations a household word. And we did it. I mean, and so, and then beyond that, as simply a concept, we have begun to realize reparations in the real world. I mean, the place from where this discussion is occurring is in part due to its development, due in part to reparations. And I want to say that this is work by the party. This is the party's work. The party created the African People's Solidarity Committee and extended the revolution to places that it had never been before. There's never been a time. This whole discussion of reparations has been one that's usually happens within the African community. There's never been a time where the reparations demand has actually been extended into the North American community, the colonizer community, where the colonizer population had to deal with the question of reparation. Our party did that. Our party makes it necessary in various places throughout this country, and I expect we plan to organize African People's Solidarity Committee in South Africa moving forward. But this takes the struggle out into a much broader capacity and extends the revolution, because the party and African people do not exist in isolation from the rest of the world. So African internationalism is just not a philosophy of black people about black people. It's a philosophy about the world from the perspective of oppressed African people. It's the world that's being defined from the perspective of African people around the world. It's not that it's just a black theory, it's a black this, a black that. It's seeing the whole world differently. It's defining the world from this perspective, which is the more accurate location in history and in the world on the planet Earth than what white people occupy, and therefore more accurate and gives us a better opportunity to win. Many white people express their gratitude for this opportunity to take a principled, non-opportunistic stand in the struggle against colonial capitalism. And if they are not joining the Solidarity Movement, they are certainly being influenced by our party. There are literally thousands of white people who patronize those economic institutions that are currently led by members of the Solidarity Movement, all of them receive basic information that informs them that the Solidarity presence in our institutions, our furniture stores, our food booths, the One Africa, One Nation marketplace is voluntary, informed participation in the struggle for black power under the leadership of our party. All of these, there are thousands of people who, if you just look at the One Africa, One Nation market in Philadelphia alone, with more than 100 African vendors who actually make a living there, the furniture store. I mean, there are thousands of people who go through this process every day. It's a material manifestation, not just a discussion. Concretely, this is what reparations look like. This is what the revolutionary work looks like. This is what solidarity looks like. This is not just an idea. This is a reality that anybody, you can touch it, And I was at a gym in St. Louis just the other day, and a young woman, I was wearing, working out in a shirt with Uhuru, I think it perhaps was the book fair that we do at the marketplace in Philadelphia. And she stopped me and she said, there's Uhuru here? I said, yeah, it's Uhuru. She says, well, I was born here, but I live in Philadelphia. And, are you connected with the Uhuru there? I said, we're the same organization. And then I'm struck by it. But here she is in St. Louis, but she's run into the party and our movement in Philadelphia. And she says, I pass the Uhuru furniture store every day. And I'm aware of, the marketplaces and things like that where you see Uhuru. You see the Uhuru furniture trucks. You see the trucks from our food programs. And this is concrete material manifestation of the revolution. This is who we are. And this is the significance of the work. This is the party. And the African People's Solidarity Committee is the party extending itself into the North American or the colonizer nation communities. This is the party that's extending itself there. And I think it's never been done before. And we are doing it now, and that's, yeah. The work of the Solidarity Movement continues to introduce and win support from whites for reparations to African people. We're certain that many Africans who organize around reparations among the colonized African population are unaware that their reparations work is being made easier by the existence of the African People's Solidarity Committee inside the colonizer nation population. One of the most impressive mass campaigns of our party, one that speaks eloquently to our growing capacity and strategic clarity, was the 2017 electoral campaign in St. Petersburg, Florida, where the party fielded two candidates, one for city council and the other for mayor. The party's candidate for District 6 city council seat was Akile Anai. Our mayor candidate was Jesse Neville from the African People's Solidarity Committee. In a 6-month campaign that lasted from March through August, our candidates forced the issue of reparations to African people onto the electoral ballot and the consciousness of the city's population. Millions of people throughout the U.S. are unfamiliar with the reparations demand. Within 6 months, we made it a popular issue precisely because our party took it to the electoral ballot, the primary means by which political ideas achieve legitimacy for most people within the U.S. prisons of nations. Here people, they never would have had a discussion around reparations. They don't hear about reparations. This is something that's dealt with in small circles of the African community generally, but we take it out to the world. It's a living struggle. We're talking about making a revolution. You can't make a revolution by yourself. You can't make a revolution in a closed meeting with 13 people talking about reparation. You can't make a revolution like that. It has to become an issue that's a part of the very fabric of the political discussion and struggle that people are involved in, here in the United States and other places around the world. Despite the fact that the African population of St. Petersburg comprises only 23% of the total population, our candidates electrified all the electoral debates. On one occasion, they led hundreds of white people in a march through downtown St. Petersburg chanting unity through reparations and expressing solidarity with black power under the leadership of the African working class. This has never happened in the history of the colonial domination of our people in the U.S. or in the world for that matter. Local elections in St. Petersburg are officially nonpartisan, but almost everyone understands that the candidates are representatives of their respective ruling class political parties. Our campaign split the local Democratic Party, whose secretary and treasurer joined our Uhuru candidates and actually became precinct leaders. On the other hand, the chair of the Pinellas County Democratic Party joined with the head of the Police Benevolent Society, Benevolent Association, and declared our movement a domestic terrorist organization. This led to a reprimand by an African leader of the Democratic Party in another county. For the first time, so in this election, this is extraordinary, for reparations, the Democratic Party split, and we had the secretary and the treasurer of the Democratic Party resigned from the Democratic Party and joined our campaign. That's a statement of the significance of the work that we do and its material effect on the political terrain in this country. For the first time in the city's history, one of the candidates for mayor, ours, was denied access to the only televised electoral debate. Never happened before, never. Every candidate for mayor has been up to this time participated in the televised debate, except now, because they did not want us to be seen or heard. The ruling class debate sponsors even denied the people of St. Petersburg free access to the debate venue because of the fear of attendance by the enthusiastic base of the Uhuru movement. So they said not only are we not allowing anybody to debate except the two people we want to have heard, but we're not even going to allow free access. People can't just freely come. You have to have an invitation to come to watch the debate because of the concern of our forces. Eventually, they decided on an invitation-only policy for attendance. A summation of the groundwork done for the campaign was printed in the November 2017 issue of the Burning Spear. It is impressive and speaks volumes to the state of our party. Here's what it says. Quote, during the 6-month campaign, the committee submitted 1,800 signed petitions to get Jesse Neville's name on the ballot, held 15 press conferences, held 15 of our own actions and events, knocked on or dropped literature at 25,000 doors, made 10,000 calls to voters and our base, distributed 700 yard signs, had one 6,000-piece mailing, made one TV commercial that ran on 15 cable stations. InPDUM held 24 Sunday rallies to meet the candidates, participated, spoke, or intervened at 20 community events, debates, and churches, held a social media reach in the tens of thousands, raised $14,500 for Jesse Neville's campaign, and $11,700 for Achilles, unquote. The Burning Spear article ended with this declaration, quoting again, although we did not win the election, we built a powerful movement based in the African working class of St. Petersburg. We created the foundation for winning numerous reparations elections in the future by forming the vibrant, precinct-based organization, Communities United for Reparations and Economic Development, CURED, led by Achille Anai and Jesse Neville, unquote. CURED joins the long list of mass fronts through which the party continues to express its profound influence and revolutionary leadership in this upcoming period. The growth of our mass organizations represent practical evidence that we are the advanced detachment of the African working class. We have always moved with the conviction that our deep relationship with the masses of our people, who are the real makers and shapers of history, will ensure the inevitable victory in our struggle for national liberation. Our strategy is working. Comrades, we are winning. If we carry out the mandates laid out here and implement the regional strategy unveiled in Chapter 6, by the time of our next Congress in 2023, we will have put organizational roots down in the heart of colonial capitalism throughout the African world. with the capability of choking the life of our colonial oppressors. With this strategy, the advanced detachment of the African working class will make revolution the main trend in the world again and unite with oppressed peoples everywhere to wipe imperialist white power off the face of the earth. Uhuru. So,
Uhuru, thank you for that presentation of the political report to the 7th Party Congress. And thank you for that presentation of the political report to the 7th Party Congress. At this time, we want to open the floor up for questions. We also want to encourage people online through the various platforms to submit your questions in the comment section, and we will field them. And at this time, we want to call up anybody for questions.
Uhuru, Chairman, I just really want to appreciate this whole political report. And, just reading this political report and, going to Congress, this is the most significant document and event that is going to occur for African people in the world. And I can't even express how honored I am to be part of the party. And this part, it had, the whole political report talks a lot about InPDUM and me. Yes. And the part that just stood out when I was reading it is just so true that myself and so many other Africans, just like myself, have not had have not been brought into political life. And if we have, not in the interest of ourselves. And I'm always struggling to make sure that people don't see me as a mutant or something that, you can't attain, but, to just really help African people understand that I am you. Like we the same struggles, that we have to understand that InPDUM is a mass organization. And I think that sometimes people don't understand that, like, some people will come to meetings, some people won't, but every African, everybody have to participate in this struggle. And so I really, really appreciate this political report, because I think that my whole IEC, we've been reading this part over and over again, and that's what just helping us to see how to go back to our manuals and go back to like the core of what InPDUM was designed to be, to really forward InPDUM in a real way, and just really say that I think that I unite a zillion times in these hubs and how significant and important. And I think in building of the Black Power Blueprint and actually being involved in this whole process really help us all to see how important it is for the Black colony to be able to go into these spaces where we have the spear and Uzi and decolonize and just different things that they can go in and purchase and go into these spaces. Because in this era, I just unite with this political report that is so critical for people to be able to see, touch, and feel, Black power. So, Uhuru.
Uhuru. I want to say that Comrade, Kalambayi is the clearest example of the power and possibility of the African working class, and that the strength of our party will be determined ultimately by our connection in the African working class communities, because the African working class, I met Comrade Kalambayi marching in Ferguson. I mean, I'm just in a march in Ferguson, and this is what had mobilized so many African working class people after the murder of Mike Brown. It happens, that people come out, exorcised, so to speak, by this kind of, violence imposed on our community. And so with the murder of Mike Brown, people came out. And in one of the marches, this is where I met this comrade. It wasn't at a debate. It wasn't, at one of these scenes, forums that's held by, the petty bourgeoisie or something like that. It wasn't at the Democratic Party club. It was in the streets. And what's clear to me that if we take the revolution to the masses in these communities where people are located, that's going to be the source of our strength and the source of the revolutionary project. That's why we put so much emphasis on the question of vanguard. It's not a statement that we're making to the world as much as one that we're making to ourselves and to our membership in terms of what our role and responsibility is to step forward. And we got to go home. And home is in these colonized communities, working class communities. The first one that we try to move out of, the first time we get we become upperly poor, we get, we run from that community. We got to go back. And there's this refrain among the African petty bourgeoisie that, that the African communities suffer because the African petty bourgeoisie, where we used to have the doctors living next door and this kind of stuff, now the African petty bourgeoisie has deserted us. What we don't have is the African working class conscious of our own interests and organized and fighting for those interests. And that's the struggle that we have to make. That's why we have to concretely put it down on the ground. We have to be there. Every day is going to be a march in Ferguson for us as organizers. That's how the African working class will get brought into political life. Uhuru.
Uhuru, Chairman.
Uhuru, Comrade.
I was reading on page 175 where you said, InPDUM must build for the long term to contend with the pending whirlwind of struggle. And I remember reading when you were saying that InPDUM's leadership has changed according to the attitude of the situations that's going on in the world. This time, InPDUM has the job of breaking down the barriers between the petty bourgeoisie and the African working class, when all along the petty bourgeoisie is the African working class. They just changed, they lost their way. We have to bring them back to reality. Uhuru.
Well, I think it's really important for us to understand there is a position that's out in the world that we're all just black people kind of stuff. And therefore you can't, there are no classes. In fact, there are class differences in our community, and classes are social forces. And these social forces, they become so not just by what's in their ideas, but in fact that what's in their ideas is a consequence of them being located structurally in society in a particular place. And they are different from the African working class. And generally speaking, even though all of us are colonized, the African working class has to have a independent capacity to identify and solve its own problems and move to resolve its own contradiction. In the African working class, the solution for the entire nation, for the entire African nation that's colonized. You don't even see a colonial situation that's actually been resolved to result in real independence. You don't see that. I mean, just a handful of people, just on the very top. Even if you look at South Africa now, you see, where people say, wow, it's free now because you got African leaders, et cetera. You see, it's just on a handful of people right on the very top, who are doing well. The vast majority of our people are suffering and catching hell. That's because the African petty bourgeoisie has come to power. The African petty bourgeoisie is fighting in its own interest, solving its own problems. And the African working class because we've been blindly following the African petty bourgeoisie, don't have a capacity to deal with our own problems. So the African petty bourgeoisie and the African working class are different. They are different social forces. They have different interests as social forces ultimately, even though both of them have an interest in ending colonialism, but ending colonialism means one thing for the African petty bourgeoisie and another for the African working class. Like they've ended colonialism, at least theoretically, in South Africa, because you got a black president, you got a black this and that. But you saw just the film we saw the other night in terms of they shot the miners. You saw those Negroes. That's the petty bourgeoisie who actually killed and then justified killing them and promised to kill more if they. And of course, we don't have to go that far. We can look right here in St. Louis and see the African petty bourgeoisie in leadership, et cetera. So the petty bourgeoisie and the working class, they are different. Uhuru. Yeah.
Uhuru, Chairman.
Uhuru, Comrade.
This is Kitty from the African People Solidarity Committee, and I just want to really salute you for this report, but more than that, for what this chapter reveals of all the organizations that you built over the years, and everything was always to solve the problems of the revolution, and how many different organizations and their critical role each and every one plays in the African Revolution. And, of course, I'm certainly, appreciative and struck by the formation of the African People Solidarity Committee. And, it's just a brilliant strategy to extend the party into the colonizer nation, as you say in the chapter. It's just downright profound. And I also salute Chairwoman Penny Hess for being the first person to really internalize African internationalism as her own, which allowed the rest of us to come forward, because it was not an easy path. It was a tremendous struggle to forge a stance of solidarity within the white colonizer population when we have 600 years of violence, in this parasitic relationship with the African community. And you went against the grain, you went against everything to do this. And I just wanted to ask you if you could talk a little bit more about, what made you do it? What brought you more to the conclusions of this as part of the strategy of the African Revolution? Thank you.
Uhuru. I think that there's a lot that I had to overcome to get to that place, because I think that for colonized Africans, that it's necessary first to learn how to hate white people before you can love yourself. Because everything that we are taught and every experience that we have, for the most part, presupposes that we're supposed to love white people, and we have to be like white people and want to be white and this kind of stuff. And just in terms of my own development, which is, I guess, what's being spoken to here, is that was necessary. And for a while, I was a rabid, anti-white black nationalist, until this stance of mine, this understanding of mine, ran into the wall of its own limitations. While it allowed me to finally love black people and myself, on the one hand, it left too many unanswered questions. It's an oversimplified thing, because it didn't explain people and forces like Duvalier in Haiti and Mobutu in Congo, and the Negroes who we knew who were big shots every place else, who were oppressing and dogging out black people. If it were simply a matter of white evil and black goodness, then how can I explain that? And it made it necessary for me to learn some other things about the society itself, the science of society, that was not limited just to the experiences of Africans, or not compartmentalized in the way that bourgeois intellectuals have historically done things. And I was forced to see the interconnectedness of everything. And then when I say I was forced to not just sleeping on it or stuff like that. Stuff is happening in the whole world. I mean, people are engaged in struggles everywhere. And the Vietnamese, I'm having to reflect on the Vietnamese and the success of the Vietnamese struggle and how that struggle is being carried out in other revolutionary movements around the world. I'm having to learn these things. And if for no other reason, it becomes clear to me that strategically, you don't, to win this revolution, and if that is what it's about, I think this transformation in me became necessary. Whether I was in this thing just because I was pissed off, whether I was just trying to resolve some personal anger, being mad with white people, whether I wanted to win freedom, liberation. And to win liberation required me to explore all of what that meant. I don't have the best answer for you on that question, except my own investigations in life and struggle. First of all, helped me to understand the motive force in all human society, being the struggle to produce life. I learned enough about the emergence of white people as people, to recognize that white people ain't all that, which was really important for for Africans to colonize, because this really overblown definition of whiteness and white people is something that can be stupefying. I mean, and white people ain't all of that, In my own experiences, I came to learn some of that. I don't have a good explanation for you. I mean, science, revolutionary science, and ongoing struggle to try to solve the problems of the revolution, things like that, forced me to have to look at that. That's all I can say about that. And I'm self-critical for delving into this whole subjective thing that I just went through. But I just think the science of just trying to solve the problems of the revolution and forced me to science, as opposed to just being motivated, by my own, passions and things like that. I'm very passionate about this question. But my passions, when I'm at my best, my passions don't direct me, when I'm at my best. And white people are difficult to deal with because it's imperial attitude. There is a thing of imperialist attitude that any colonized person around the world experiences and has experienced in one way or another. People call it racism and all that kind of stuff, but there's an imperial attitude that even, the whites that love us, constantly we have to deal with, and that white people do it naturally, don't even have to think about it. It's just where you are, and just located in history and in the structure of society. I almost said capitalist society, but I think it's even a little more complicated than that. Anybody else? Are we getting anything online?
Uhuru, we do. We have a comment and another question online from Penny Hess. We have, Uhuru, I salute the powerful political report to the 7th Congress of the African People's Socialist Party, and Chairman Omali Yeshitela, who has fought tirelessly since he was very young for African people to be independent in our lifetime. It is a profound honor for us as white people in the African People's Solidarity Committee to be working under the leadership of the organized African working class. Our task is to win reparations from the white population, which has lived on the pedestal of the oppression of African people for 600 years. Give us the stability for the first time in history for us to turn loose our whiteness, overcome our self-imposed isolation from the peoples on the planet. As you say, history has shown the correctness of the party strategy and that it is in the greatest interest of the white people to stand in solidarity with the African Revolution and its vanguard, the African People's Socialist Party. And we have a question from Vince Lawrence, which says, could you explain the words bourgeoisie and petty bourgeoisie as it applies to class in the black community?
Uhuru. That is from Comrade Vincent Lawrence. I'm so glad to hear from him. He's located in Fort Myers, Florida. He was a founding member of the African People's Socialist Party. He was a member of the Fort Myers Black Rights Fighters, and that came together with Jomo and the Gainesville Black Study Group to form the African People's Socialist Party, and who will be joining us at the 7th Congress here in St. Louis in October. And that's a good question in terms of defining the petty bourgeoisie, the bourgeoisie, the petty bourgeoisie, and the African petty bourgeoisie. We use the term bourgeoisie to speak to the ruling class, and that is white, a white ruling class. Sometimes we say white ruling class, but in many ways that's redundant to say white and ruling class. Because the ruling class is a social force. They are capitalists. They are the capitalist class themselves. They are the ones who own and control the means of production. That's the ruling class. That's the bourgeoisie. That's something that came into existence after the end of feudalism in Europe. And the petty bourgeoisie has typically been defined as petty, petite, small bourgeoisie. And the definitions of the petty bourgeoisie, in my view, have been a lot more ambiguous than the bourgeoisie proper. We don't even talk about, we call it the primitive petty bourgeoisie. The reason we call it primitive petty bourgeoisie is because, as I said, the bourgeoisie owns and controls the means of production. It's not just somebody who owns a factory. A person, an African, might own a factory, might even own a huge factory and what have you, but he's not a part of the capitalist class. The capitalist class owns and controls the means of production and functions as a social force. Generally speaking, this rich Negro might even be considered a capitalist, but it can't be part of the capitalist. It's not a part of the capitalist class, so we say it's primitive. We call it the petty bourgeoisie, mostly what we're looking at, because we say the primitive petty bourgeoisie because a class force is not defined simply by it. You can't define anything simply by looking at it. It's defined in relationship to other things, to others. So you say there's a capitalist class, then there's a petty bourgeoisie, a little capitalist class, then there's a working class, things like that. They are defined in relationship to each other, these social forces. So if there's no such thing as the African capitalist class that owns and controls the means of production, you won't find the African capitalist class that owns and controls the means of production. So if there's no capitalist class that owns and controls the means of production, then this force that we call the petty bourgeoisie doesn't have a relationship with an indigenous capitalist class. It has a relationship with the big bourgeoisie that is white. But it is a primitive petty bourgeoisie. We say primitive because this is a social force that, given an opportunity, if we overturn colonialism, this is the force that's prepared to spring forward and be the bourgeoisie. It's a primitive petty bourgeoisie. That's how we characterize it in the party, the primitive petty bourgeoisie. It is primitive being what? Beginning, etc. So it's always been ambiguous. For example, especially among colonized people, because it hasn't met the basic definitions that you would have, like in the capitalist center. For example, at the time when I was growing up, the person who was what do you call them? Working the railroad cars, the ones who the one who worked in the cars and the sleeping car porters. Sleeping car porters for an African pop, they made a lot of money, and they lived better in the African community. They were some of the better living, people. They had better houses and stuff. This is a sleeping car porter. Sleeping car porter, they dance and buck dance and all this other kind of stuff to get white people to give them tips and stuff like that. So to the white people, they were just monkeys-like, etc. But in the African community, because they brought home a lot of money as compared to the rest, then they lived better than. So is that the petty bourgeoisie? I'm saying that we don't, and even a simple school teacher, because of the poverty in our communities, you will see in many instances a school teacher that might not be as true today as it was, a few years ago, seemed to have more resources. Was that the petty bourgeoisie? So I'm just saying that the definitions were not that that close. We see Africans who particularly connected to the systems, through administrations, government administrations, and things like that, who live differently and are connected differently. We've considered that sectors of the petty bourgeoisie, but it's not as a solid. I don't think we can use the exact terms, the kind of definitions we would use for petty bourgeoisie and bourgeoisie in the African colonial community than we can in the colonizer community. It's a dependent entity. There are some who've written a lot about it. But the African petty bourgeoisie as a social force is an unreliable social force, and it is different. It lives differently, it acts differently than the rest of us, and sometimes it lives more on aspirations than it does on actuality, what it has. It's an aspiring force, Is there anybody else online? Any other questions, comments online?
We have a question from Mensa Ajanaku. How is it that continue to push those petty bourgeoisie forces who attempt to or do join InPDUM to commit class suicide and completely unite with African internationalism? Can the petty bourgeoisie be effective in this movement as activist forces and still lie on the backs of colonized people?
I don't know if we have that kind of problem that much in InPDUM. I mean, the petty bourgeoisie as a social force is totally unreliable. They will always betray the revolution, but the individuals from the petty bourgeoisie that can commit class suicide. And I think if you see an individual that's moving toward InPDUM, that they have a greater potential for committing class suicide. They're looking for a way to commit class suicide. And I think we've seen some evidence of people who have done that, but within InPDUM, that hasn't been the biggest thing. I don't think so. That's just as a nurse, a nurse in the petty bourgeoisie. Somebody was just pointing out a comrade in the room, and I was just, we're talking about small owners and stuff like that often, little petty merchants, et cetera, who, might be in the community. And even that's not exactly accurate in my estimation in terms of the petty bourgeoisie as a social force. But certainly we see that with politicians and other things that connected. And they achieve that designation partially because of their relationship to the state. And much of the African petty bourgeoisie becomes a petty bourgeoisie because of relationship in some fashion or another to the state. They work for these systems that the state employ in our communities. And the bourgeoisie and moving toward the bourgeoisie, forces who make their living, get their living from stealing surplus value from the labor of working people, and that's always treacherous, dangerous. Anytime you see a society where that is permitted, even if it's small, rudimentary, people who making their living or profiting off of what they call the surplus labor, the value of surplus, the surplus value of labor. Somebody have to sell their labor power to somebody else. That somebody who's purchasing that labor power is not the class. It is, generally speaking, it is a sector of the petty bourgeoisie or the bourgeoisie proper. Uhuru. Is there anyone else there?
We don't have any other questions online at this time, but I wanted to ask a question, and I'm not quite certain how to formulate it. But first of all, I just want to thank you for the political report, for your leadership, and for this particular discussion. And as was previously said by Kitty Riley, all of these various fronts that you have organized and led to allow African people to take up space in every aspect of society, so that the interests of the African working class can be fought for and defended. I wanted to kind of ask a question about the party itself and the size of the party and the effectiveness and the ability of a party in general to really lead a revolutionary struggle, because the African people in general, African people have been pushed out of political life. There is no general understanding of revolutionary theory or revolutions and the role that a party plays in a revolution. And so people tend to have this idea that you got to get every black person to agree to, for a change to occur. So I just wanted to kind of have you really talk about the role of the party as an instrument of that, and this notion of how many people have to participate in this struggle and in what way for it to happen.
Well, you do in many ways. You alluded to that when you made your first comment about the number of organizations and things like that that the party has created. That is a statement of the advanced attachment, because the party has created all these institutions and organizations. That's what we mean when we talk about cadre, being able to build organizations. So the party itself is a relatively small organization, but it leads hundreds of people and that's a literal truth. I mean, it's not the thousands that we want, but it's hundreds of people, either directly through the party and certainly through its institutions or the organizations that we've created, who sometimes not even the working class may be associated with them. But a political party is a class formation. It is comprised of the advanced sectors of a particular class, and it looks out for the interests of that class. We've given the example of the Democrat and Republican Party. And we say parties, but it's it's for all practical purposes the bourgeoisie that's organized on two fronts. And the Democratic and the Republican Party looks out for the ruling class all the time, the white ruling class. It doesn't mean that all members of the white ruling class are even capable of recognizing what their interests are at any given moment. As we use the examples of drunks and drug addicts and just don't give a damn, accept anything just raking in. And there are others who are more conscious and dedicated of their interests, but their political parties look out for their interests all the time. Right. And the party, whether they are conscious of, whether they're drug addicts, whether they're crazy, the political party looks out for the interests of that class all the time. That's why the African working class having its own party is so important. It is the advanced detachment. It is not the working class. It is the advanced detachment of the working class. It is the vanguard of the working class. It is that sector of the working class that looks out for the interests of the class all the time, struggles to advance the interests of the class all the time, even if many of the class don't even recognize what the interests are. And when you suffer the kinds of defeat that our revolution defeated in the 1960s, people don't get it, but we're still recovering from that horrendous defeat that we experienced. Then drugs pumped into your community, violence pumped into your community. So the class, without the advantage of its own revolutionary organization, can be caught up in mayhem and confusion because there's nothing that provides the leadership. If you took away the leadership of white people, represented by the political parties and other institutions they've created to provide that leadership, then you would see, and the economic base of the white community would deteriorate to such an extent that it was like everybody else, then you would see chaos and mayhem there. But the parties and these institutions they've created is what helps the white people define what it is their goals are, where they're trying to go at any given moment. It's not like some, you're talking about the American way. The American way is the way that the white ruling class says that it is in any given time. And the reason it seems to be so confusing today is because the white ruling class is split in trying to define what the hell the American way is right now. So there's a battle around that. So the party, our party, and our influence is much greater than the size of the party itself. And because we look out for the interests of the class. I mean, we're in a community now that that's faced all the time with horizontal violence, Africans killing each other, et cetera, et cetera. This is a product of colonialism, and the working class has been without its own class force providing leadership for the class, putting it together and defining a direction for it. That's why we have to be in the communities, living with the people, et cetera, become clearly, to provide that kind of leadership, to be the advanced detachment. So, and then we create these other organizations and what have you. The party does this. These are not, if these organizations by themselves, the African National Women's, just a women's organization by itself, it's just a feminist thing that's out there. I don't care if it's black or whatever, just a feminist manifestation because none of the class can come to revolutionary conclusions on its own. The science has to be taken there, and then the organization and the leadership has to be from the parties, recognize that we need African women and we need the African people who, with the skills and stuff, brought into the revolutionary project. So we create an APDEP, an All-African People's Economic Development Project, et cetera, that can bring scientists and et cetera to the service of Africa and the African Revolution. And the International People's Democratic Uhuru movement to sweep up masses of African people who may not meet the requirements of party membership. It's not that they're not working class. It's that they may not meet the requirements of party membership. Lack of discipline, lack of any other kinds of things like that. But the party has influence there among the masses of the people that's much greater than the size of our organization. And then we have to also be reminded, even like the question that was raised by Comrade Vince Lawrence about the bourgeoisie and the petty bourgeoisie, it's not a universal definition, even our own in the African world. I mean, you look at Africans in Zimbabwe and Africans in Nigeria and Africans in South Africa, et cetera, they still, as much resources as they may command or appear to command at any given time are servants of the capitalists, of the white capitalism. For the most part, sometimes they're volunteering. Some of them are trying to volunteer to become servants of Chinese capital, but they still are dependencies, for lack of a better term. They still are dependencies and not independent like the bourgeoisie is independent. as a social force. It has to make deals and stuff like that among itself. But the African so-called, what people like to refer to as African bourgeoisie, is not independent. It cannot make its own deals. It cannot do that. It has to contend with and always find a way to satisfy the requirements of the white capital, or increasingly, like I said, they're trying to volunteer to become subjects of Chinese capital. They don't even have the ability to to aspire to be the big dog themselves. Uhuru. So, was that Uhuru? Yes, Comrade. Uhuru.
Uhuru, Chairman, again, I just want to really appreciate your leadership in this political report. But as I was listening, I was getting a deeper understanding of the petty bourgeoisie. And I just really appreciate this discussion, because what I see, like even in Ferguson or just all over, is what we would call the petty bourgeoisie, which is petty bourgeoisie aspirations. And I see it in my family. My family is working class with aspirations, and sometimes those aspirations they are deadly, because they work against their own interests. And it made me think about how I heard you say that when a people have no theory, they borrow from somewhere else. And the working class are borrowing from the bourgeoisie, and have these tendencies to work against their own interests, even when they think it's speaking to their interests. And so I just really appreciate this discussion, because I think that, even I think someone had the question about, meeting these people, InPDUM, when they come into the work. And what I see as being the international president, when I'm organizing people, the aspirations of the petty bourgeoisie, and through African internationalism and political education, deepening, giving them a theory, erase those ideas and help them to have a stance where it speaks to their own interest. Uhuru.
Uhuru. That's right on, Comrade.
So we do have another question. If I can get it up. And I can say it is a question from Akile Anai, coming out of St. Petersburg, Florida. And it says, Uhuru Chairman, salute to this brilliant chapter of the political report. The future of the party and the African nation is bright, if this report is any indication. I just wanted to salute you and your unrelenting vision as a leader of the African nation and for solving the problems of the revolution. Our organizations and institutions being the clearest examples. One of the newest fronts of the party, as mentioned in this chapter, is Communities United for Reparations and Economic Development in St. Petersburg, Florida, formed after the party's dynamic electoral campaigns of 2017. Can you speak to the party's role in spearheading the call to seize the electoral arena, the ballot and the bullet, and the future of our party participating in this arena through Cured and other organizations?
Uhuru, I think that's a really important question, because just briefly, what happened to us, our revolutionary movement, as you know, people often talk about how black people died for the vote and we don't vote and we, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And it is true that African people faced bombings and killings and stuff just for trying to join the Democratic Party. It was never not a revolutionary organization, but they treated it like a revolutionary act for African people to be able to vote. Because the electoral process, for one thing, was not something that was created for African participation. That's something that should be clearly understood. Africans were not supposed to participate. Two, that the electoral process, again, is simply a nonviolent contest between sectors of the ruling class for control of the state. And so it is not to overturn the system, but to protect the system so that you don't have to have these violent contests of who's going to take over now. You do it through the electoral process. The system is safe. you have an election, people say bad things about each other, et cetera, but whatever the outcome, the winner is the one that goes into office. That's the outcome. Now, when Africans were fighting for the right to vote and do all these other things, so for improvements in our community, it wasn't on necessarily a revolutionary trajectory, but it was treated like that by white power, white people. And a lot was at stake. Who was going to be the sheriff in this county? Who was going to be the city council? And those offer up, real kinds of resources and things like that for the white people who exist in these communities. Now they're going to have to contend with Africans just like they have to do with other jobs and stuff like that. So that was problematic. But the thing is that the struggle for black people that went beyond just the right to vote, we were talking about black power. We were talking about the ability to run our own affairs. The Panthers put forth their program. Jomo put forth his own program. You saw demands for reparations began to be made as well. And then at the very same time, 1965, when universal suffrage was legally won in this country with the Voting Rights Act, then the government was assassinating, killing all of the leaders, destroying revolutionary organizations, etc. So by the time you get the right to vote, you don't have anything to vote for. And in many instances, you ain't got nobody to vote. You don't have anybody to vote for because the government's killed everybody, destroyed your programs. They were, at the same time we won the right to vote, the government is attacking Panther offices and other militant organizations all around this country, destroying these programs we had in the community. They're gone. So now the only thing that you don't have an organization, the only thing that's there is the Democratic Party. The Democratic Party doesn't have a revolutionary program, never had a revolutionary program. And so this is what pushed African people out of the electoral process or made it questionable whether elections is something that we should deal with, because the Democrats, the Democrats were the ones who set the terms. And what the party has done is say that one of the ways that neocolonialism is exercised and promoted in the African community is through these African politicians. People run for office and they have these positions. And they run for what white power wants them to run for. They never run on anything around African people. So we're going to take the revolution that they thought they killed, the revolution that said black power, the revolution that demanded reparations, the revolution that demanded an end to police murder and things like that. We're taking that and putting it back on the platform, and we're going to use the electoral process. We're intruding into the situation so it's no longer the private situation for the African petty bourgeoisie who are trying to sell us out. And this is the thing that we do, and we use this, and also it helps to mobilize African workers. The bourgeoisie does not want mass participation in the elections. That's why they don't want anything on the agenda that would draw the masses to them. That's why they treated us the way they did in Florida when we ran those campaigns. That's why we couldn't get televised, because they don't want the people to hear us. The people hear, then they're going to come out. They're going to come out for black community control of the police. They're going to come out for reparations. They're going to come out for those things that affect us. And so finally, the party has the ability to contribute to bringing the revolution back onto the agenda through the electoral process that had been closed to the revolution for the longest period of time. And that, we believe, can be transformative in terms of mobilizing thousands and millions of African people who right now are attracted or believe in the legitimacy of the electoral process if they don't believe in anything else about politics. And the fact is, the majority of Africans who participate in politics, they do it in the Democratic Party and not in the African People's Socialist Party or any other revolutionary organization. So that is a understated thing, and I know I have to shut up because we have going to the announcements and what have you. So I wish that had been asked earlier so we could have talked more about it. Uhuru.
Right.
Yeah.
Uhuru. So now we have the announcements. This study was brought to you by the Department of Agitation and Propaganda, Winning the War of Ideas. For worldwide revolutionary news and analysis, visit theburningspear.com. For revolutionary radio, dynamic shows, and music by Africans all around the world, tune into Black Power 96.3 FM, broadcasting out of St. Petersburg, Florida, and accessible via the Black Power 96 app for Apple and Android, or online at blackpower96.org. Did you unite with what you heard today and want to learn more about how you can get involved with the African People's Socialist Party? Visit APSP Uhuru, APSPUHURU.org for all information regarding how you can apply. On November 3rd and 4th, the Black is Back Coalition for Social Justice, Peace, and Reparations will be conducting its annual march, rally, and conference in Washington, D.C. This march is appropriately themed. There is no peace. Africa and Africans are at war. U.S. to the world, comply or die. More information about this event can be found at blackisbackcoalition.org. Also, December 9th through 16th, come cruise with us aboard the Marcus Garvey Legacy Cruise, a time for revolutionaries to kick back and relax. You'll be on board with Chairman Omali Yeshitela while getting to enjoy the spoils of the ship. Destinations include Grand Cayman, Mahogany Bay, Belize, and Cozumel, Mexico. Get signed up today at uhurulegacycruise.org. That is UHURU legacycruise.org. This cruise also serves as a fundraiser for the African Socialist International. In occupied Azania, known to the colonizer of South Africa, we are hosting our 6th and final pre-Congress conference September 8th and 9th. For information around that conference, please visit apscongress.org. The 7th Congress of the African People's Socialist Party will be held October 6th through 12th in St. Louis, Missouri, and is themed Vanguard, the Advanced Detachment of the African Revolution. A part of this historic event will be the Black Power Masquerade Ball, where you can display this, with live culture, performances, dancing, an African dessert buffet, and silent auction. All information around the Congress and banquet can be found at apspcongress.org. Register today. We want to say Uhuru and thank everybody for joining us, and forward to the 7th Party Congress. Uhuru.
Uhuru.